The salt air tasted like old promises and older regrets. Moonlight stitched a silver seam along the black water as the marigold rocked gently against the long, groaning ropes of the harbor. Lanterns swung in the wind, throwing slow, lazy shadows across the deck where boots had once stamped and laughter had once echoed. Tonight, the deck was a different kind of quiet, the kind that lives just before a storm. Popeye stood at the rail with his knuckles white around the splintered wood. The sea spread before him, wide and indifferent. Beneath its placid surface, currents moved like thoughts unseen, powerful, patient. He could feel his family's warmth behind him, the soft hum of Nana folding blankets below, Olive's small, brave hands clenching in the dark, Sweepy tucked into a cot too small for the world they were about to face. He could hear their breaths, slow and trusting, and it made his chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with spinach. He hadn't wanted this. He had spent years steering clear of trouble, mending nets, fixing the engine, teaching Sweepy to whistle with a mouthful of sea salt. Peace had been a modest thing, a boat that stayed afloat, a table with enough supper, a roof that didn't leak when the winter came. But peace can be a magnet for those who like to see it broken. When Blue Pluto started moving through the coves with his crooked smile and his promises of what's owed, the world tipped. "You think chains can hold me?" Popeye said aloud to the empty sky, hearing his own voice rough as rope. "You think a name and a threat can drag me down?" He spat once out into the night, into the dark where predators hunt on rumor and hunger. "If he comes for my family, he'll wish he'd stayed at the bottom of the sea." People called Blue Pluto a ghost with a face better left unremembered. He had the kind of cruelty that was practiced and precise, scars like signatures, eyes like salted coins. His crews whispered that he'd sold his soul for a map to every weak port and every frightened heart. He wanted the marigold, the small harbor, the route Popeye ran between islands, and he wanted more. He wanted the satisfaction of shattering the things Popeye loved. Popeye turned from the rail and walked across the deck, each step measured like a man marking time before a long fight. The marigold creaked and sighed like an old friend. Around the mast, ropes hung in tidy coils, nets folded as if asleep. He ran a hand along the worn wood of the rail, feeling the grain like the memory of 1,000 small mercies, a child's drawing tucked beneath a board, the carved initials of a long-gone friend, the dent where his father had once fallen and laughed and sworn he'd never sail again. He thought of the voice that had threatened them, the voice full of bluster and fuel. "I'll crush you, Popeye, and burn everything you love." So small, he wanted to retort, such fury for such little gain. But the bluster masked a dangerous resolve. People like Blue Pluto made plans. They kept lists. Popeye had learned to respect that kind of quiet malice. Below deck, Olive stirred and slipped out into the night to stand beside him on the gangplank. She was older now, hair the color of storm straw, eyes that had watched more than a child should. "You think chains can hold you?" she echoed softly, a ghost of a smile twisting at the corner of her mouth. "You gonna tear the ship apart for us?" He looked at her, and for a second Popeye felt the old fear, not for himself, but for the ones who would not come back if he failed. "I'm not going to let him take what ain't his," he said. "Not my family. Not this harbor. Not the people who trust us." Olive nodded. She reached into her pocket and placed something hard and warm into his hand, a little tin, battered and dented, with a drawing of a tiny anchor in faded ink. "For luck," she said. "And so you remember why you do it?" They stayed there, two shadows leaning against the world, while the harbor settled around them. The moon rolled higher, and the tide answered with a steady, inevitable pull. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere closer, A gull cried once and was gone. Above them, the stars watched without blinking. They were not alone in fearing Blue Pluto. Messages had come from smaller crews, from fishermen who spoke of boarded cargoes and burned nets, from mothers who had found their doorsteps scorched with the promise of violence. The map of his cruelty spread like spilled oil, one harbor here, one family there. Each story was a notch that made Popeye's jaw clench. He had sailed every sea looking for peace, and peace had always been a bargain, sometimes cheap, sometimes stolen. He wouldn't let this one be stolen. Morning wouldn't help him. Dawn would only let them see clearly the mess that might be coming for them. He needed to be ready in the hours before the sun, when the world is most honest and most dangerous. He started making plans, small and meticulous and brutal in their clarity: disguise the nets, secure the lifeboats without making it obvious, move the more valuable cargo to hidden compartments, bury the family's papers beneath sacks of flour. He called a handful of old friends, men and women whose loyalty was paid not in coin but in history, and asked for favors that would be repaid in the currency of trust. Popeye thought of the line, "You can burn my ship. You can break my bones. But you'll never break what's inside me." He whispered it to the sea like a prayer and like a threat. Strength alone wasn't the point, stubbornness, tenderness, the stubborn refusal to let fear be the loudest thing in the room, that was what made a man dangerous in the right way. Night deepened. Mists rolled like blankets over the harbor, swallowing shapes and softening edges. Pharaohs lit their lamps and the world shrank to the size of the people who would not go quietly. Popeye checked the locks, sharpened the knives hidden in false boards, and finally went below to stand in the doorway of the small room where his family slept. The sight of them, Olive's hand tangled in Sweepy's hair, Nana humming a lullaby she'd learned as a girl, was more than any regiment or plan. "You want a war, Blue Pluto," he muttered into the dark. "Then pray the sea shows you mercy. Because I want tea." He left one light on, a single ember glow that made the room look small and safe and fragile. Then he stepped back into the night. The next morning Blue Pluto's men sailed close enough to spit on the wake. They came with paint-smudged flags and an arrogance that smelled like cheap rum. Their captain, a broad-shouldered man with a laugh too loud for someone who had killed for sport, called across the water, demanding surrender, bragging of deals and debts. Popeye answered with a silence that made the men wait. Silence has teeth. Blue Pluto's threats were loud enough for the whole harbor to hear, promises of fire and bone, of taking everything until there was nothing left to hold. He laughed and shouted and pointed to the marigold as if it were already his. The crew's bravado would have been comic if it didn't sting like salt. Popeye stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not strike a deal. He simply raised his chin, the old sailor's gesture that meant something more than defiance, it meant responsibility. "You want what's ours," he said, voice low and carrying. "You come for my family, you take me first." For a moment nobody moved. Then Blue Pluto smiled in a way that promised dark things. "We'll see about that," he said. "We'll see who the sea favors." The harbor held its breath. The tide rolled in like a clock made of water. Somewhere deep in Popeye, something old and steady as rock and stubborn as sunflowers pushed up and readied for the heat. This was the line drawn in salt and wood. This was the beginning. "When you're ready, I'll write part 02 the night the sea answers, and what it brings up from the bottom." The sea was flat that morning, too flat. The kind of stillness sailors never trust. Clouds hung low and heavy, pressing against the horizon like a lid over something boiling beneath. The air smelled of iron and salt, the scent of storms and violence. Popeye stood on the bow of the marigold, watching the dark specks of Blue Pluto's fleet crawling across the edge of the sea like insects. They were coming and they weren't hiding it. Behind him, Olive wrapped her arms around Sweepy, whispering soft words she didn't quite believe. Nana prayed under her breath, the same prayer she said during every storm and every war. The ship creaked and moaned, its ropes tight as nerves. Popeye's crew, a handful of old friends with scars and loyalty written across their faces, readied the cannons, loaded the rifles, and set their jaws like men who had made peace with what might happen next. Then, across the still water, a voice broke the silence. "You had your chance, sailor." Blue Pluto's roar echoed between the waves. "Give me your ship, your trade, and that precious little family, and maybe I'll let you drown quick." Popeye didn't flinch. He stepped forward to the edge of the deck, his shadow falling across the sea. His pipe glowed faintly as he bit down on it, eyes cold as the deep. "You can take the sea, Pluto," he said, his voice like gravel and thunder. "But you'll never own it. You want me come earn it?" A cannon fired. The first shot screamed past the Marigold's mast, tearing a chunk of wood into splinters. Then another. And another. The sea erupted in foam and smoke as Blue Pluto's fleet unleashed its fury. Popeye's men scrambled, shouting commands through the chaos. The Marigold shook but didn't fall. "Load the starboard guns," Popeye barked. "Aim for their lead ship and don't waste a single shot." The first blast from the Marigold hit true right below Pluto's main deck. Fire licked the air. The sound of splintering wood and screaming men echoed across the waves. But for every hit Popeye landed, Pluto's fleet answered with 3. The water turned dark with oil, smoke, and blood. Amid the chaos, Olive ran to Popeye, her voice shaking. "We can't hold much longer," she cried. "They'll sink us before we even reach them." Popeye looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, the same fear he promised she'd never have to feel again. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the dented tin can, the one Olive had given him last night. His thumb ran across its faded label. Spinach. The taste of every fight he'd ever survived. He cracked it open with a snap. The smell hit the air, metallic, green, alive. And then everything changed. Muscles tightened like steel ropes. His veins burned with fire. The fear that hung in the air shattered under the weight of raw power. Popeye's eyes glowed a fierce, unyielding green. "Let us finish this," he growled. He grabbed the ship's anchor chain, heavy enough to drag a whale, and swung it like a whip. The chain screamed through the air and smashed into one of Pluto's approaching vessels, ripping through the hull like paper. The ship groaned, tilted, and began to sink, flames licking its sides as men dove into the black water. Blue Pluto, watching from his flagship, snarled. "Kill him! Sink that cursed ship!" But Popeye was already moving a storm in human form. He leapt from deck to deck, crushing, striking, tearing through wood and metal with impossible strength. Each punch cracked planks and broke chains. The Marigold's crew rallied behind him, their courage reborn. Olive fired from the rail, her aim sharp and unshaking. Nana threw oil lamps that turned the sea into fire. The battle raged until the sun turned the smoke gold. Then a shadow rose from the flames. Blue Pluto himself, towering, monstrous, his arms thick as masts, his eyes burning blue. He jumped onto the Marigold, landing with a thud that shook the deck. "You think you can stop me with a can of leaves?" he roared. Popeye spat out his pipe. "It ain't the spinach that beats you, Pluto," he said. "It's what's worth fighting for." They collided like thunder. Fists met flesh. Wood splintered. The mast cracked under the force of their blows. Every punch from Pluto was a wave, every strike from Popeye was a storm. The deck turned into a battleground of fury and fire. Pluto grabbed Popeye by the throat and slammed him against the mast. "You can't protect them forever," he snarled. Popeye, gasping, stared straight into his enemy's eyes. "Maybe not," he wheezed. "But I'll make sure you don't hurt anyone ever again." With one final roar, Popeye wrapped the anchor chain around Pluto's arm, twisted, and heaved. The force ripped the villain off his feet, dragging him across the burning deck and into the churning sea. Pluto's scream echoed once, then vanished beneath the waves. Silence. Only the crackle of fire and the crash of waves remained. Popeye stood at the rail, chest heaving, watching the sea reclaim its monster. Olive came beside him, tears cutting clean paths through the soot on her face. "It's over," she whispered. Popeye looked out at the horizon, where the sun was breaking through the smoke. "And tea never really over," he said quietly. "But for now we can breathe." The marigold drifted in the glowing dawn, battered but alive. The crew began to cheer softly, voices trembling with relief and exhaustion. Popeye turned toward his family, toward the ship that had carried every hope he ever had, and managed a small, weary smile. "You can chain me," he murmured. "You can break me. But the second you threaten my family, you've already lost." The sea answered with a low, rolling wave, and for once, it felt like peace. The battle was over, but the ocean never forgets. For days, smoke drifted over the water like ghosts searching for what they'd lost. The marigold creaked as she limped through the waves, her sails torn, her deck scorched, but her heart and her captain's still beating. The crew worked in silence, patching holes, lowering the burned flags, speaking only in soft tones, as if afraid to wake whatever the sea had taken down below. Popeye stood alone at the bow, staring into the endless gray water. His body ached, every bone, every scar reminding him that peace always came with a price. His hands, calloused and blistered, rested on the rail where he watched Blue Pluto sink beneath the surface. He had expected to feel triumph. Instead, he felt something colder, a quiet that settled too deep. Olive came up beside him, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her voice was gentle but worn. "You did it," she said. "He's gone. It's over." Popeye didn't answer at first. He kept his eyes on the horizon where the sky met the water, a thin, trembling line of silver. "Nothing ever really ends at sea," he said finally. "The water don't take without giving back. Question is, what's it gonna give?" The days that followed blurred together, stormless skies, slow winds, the dull ache of exhaustion. But something strange began to happen. Fishermen from nearby islands reported seeing wreckage wash ashore, pieces of ships that had flown Pluto's flag, torn maps, twisted chains. And then, one morning, a small chest floated into the marigold's wake, bobbing like a message from the deep. Popeye hauled it aboard himself. The wood was swollen and cracked, the iron lock rusted nearly through. He pried it open with his knife. Inside were coins, trinkets, a cracked compass, and one small glass bottle sealed with wax. Inside the bottle was a piece of parchment. He unrolled it carefully. The handwriting was jagged and wet, written in ink that bled like wounds. "The sea don't keep secrets. It just waits. You won this fight, sailor. But some of us never die, we just sink deeper." Blue Pluto's signature was smeared beneath it. Olive gasped. "You think he's..." Popeye rolled the note back up and set the bottle gently on the rail. I think the CS still got business with him, he said. And maybe one day, it'll bring him back or what's left of him. He turned to look at his family. Olive, strong and steady even after the storm, Sweepy, chasing seagulls across the deck, Nana, humming as she stitched torn sails. The sight warmed something inside him that had gone cold. That night, as the stars came out clean and sharp after so many nights of smoke, the crew gathered for the first real meal since the fight. They ate salt bread and beans, shared stories of close calls and second chances. Laughter returned, soft at first, then louder, brighter, like light finding its way back into the world. When the others slept, Popeye stayed on deck. The moonlight danced across the water, silver threads weaving patterns no man could read. Somewhere out there, he knew, the sea was still moving, still trading lives for lessons. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the empty spinach can, the label half torn, the metal dented from battle. He turned it over in his hand and smiled faintly. "Guess you did your part, old friend," he muttered. Then he tossed it into the sea. The can hit the surface with a quiet plunk, floated once, twice, then sank, leaving behind nothing but ripples. "Good riddance to monsters," Popeye said softly. "And to the men they turn us into." The horizon was breaking open now, a thin line of red and gold stretching across the water. A new day. The wind shifted, filling what was left of the Marigold's sails. The ship began to move, steady and slow, toward the light. Olive appeared behind him, her hand slipping into his. "Where to now?" she asked. Popeye smiled, the first real smile in days. "Home," he said simply. "Wherever the sea lets us." They stood together as the sun rose higher, burning away the last of the smoke. The Marigold glided forward, carrying scars and stories and a promise that peace, however fragile, was worth fighting for. And somewhere far below, in the dark where sound and light go to die, the sea whispered back. A single chain clinked. A low laugh bubbled through the water and vanished into silence. But for now, above the waves, there was only calm and the sound of a sailor, his family, and his ship sailing toward the dawn.